Today I have to review Gamera 3. I'm going to need something stronger than that. Hello, Jacksonites, and welcome to the grand, not so grand, finale of the Heisei Gamera trilogy. Today, I'll be reviewing, as I said in my last video, one of my least favorite Gamera movies of the entire franchise, and I know I'm going to be receiving some hate for my review on this movie. But you know what? I paint a target on myself. Fucking bring it. I don't care. Today, I am reviewing 1999's Gamera 3 Revenge of Irys, also known as Awakening of Irys, but I like to call it Revenge of Irys because, like the last movie, that sounds way better. That sounds way better. So Gamera 3 Revenge of Irys is a very, very, very distinctive kaiju film. Not just Gamera film, but kaiju film in general. It is regarded as one of the greatest monster movies ever made. It is regarded as one of the absolute best Gamera movies of the entire series, potentially the best, which in that aspect I do agree because just, obviously we've seen some of the other installments that this movie franchise has to offer, so I think it just kind of earns that title by default. But it also receives the title of the greatest kaiju movie since the original Godzilla. Do I agree with this statement? No. Not at all. I'm not the biggest fan of this movie. I thought Guardian of the Universe was overrated. And then I took another look at this film. And I am just going to come out and say Gamera 3 is my least favorite installment of the Gamera Heisei trilogy. It is now one of my least favorite kaiju films. And in my opinion, is easily one of the top 5 most overrated monster movies I have ever seen in my life. More overrated than Guardian of the Universe. I said it. I think when this movie really started to get on my bad side was when I heard somebody classify this as the Dark Knight of kaiju films. And I don't hate something because it's popular. I really don't. A lot of times it is purely coincidental. I have tried to like this movie so many times. Almost as much as War of the Gargantuas. I have tried so hard to like this movie. And at one point, I actually did succeed for a little while. But then some time went by and I rewatched the movie again. And it lost all its value for me. I really do not care for this movie. It is just not my kind of kaiju film. It's just not my kind of film in general. And War of the Gargantuas is not killer, KPF. That is just sacrilege. So, nope. With that being said, you enjoy watching Guardian, KPF. With that being said, let's get into the plot of Gamera 3. So 3 years have passed since Gamera's fight with the Legion Queen, and the conflict with the Gauss has just gotten worse and worse and worse as the years have gone by, and which have all evolved into Hyper Gauss, and Gamera is seemingly just flying all over the world, just trying to get rid of them all, which is he's slowly kind of failing at because he's only one monster, whereas the Gauss, they literally procreate like rabbits. So Mayumi Nagamine is back, and she returns to aid the Japanese government in addressing the threat of the Gauss. A graveyard of Gamera fossils is found at the bottom of the sea, and shadowy government agents, occultist Miss Asakura and Karata Shinya, are meanwhile working to a different agenda, with Asakura believing Gamera to be some kind of evil spirit. Oh boy, these two characters. So a pair of Gauss glide to Tokyo's Shibuya district. However, and this is where we see our first monster fight of the movie, and the two Gauss are massacred by Gamera. However, this is at the cost of 20,000 human lives, causing the Japanese government to order Gamera's immediate destruction. Oh. Meanwhile, a young girl named Ayana, whose parents were inadvertently killed by Gamera during his previous fight with Gauss back in 1995 during the events of Guardian. While she's walking home from school, living at a new village with her extended family, discovers a stone egg that is sealed within her village temple. And this egg soon hatches a small tentacled creature whom Ayana names Irys after her dead pet cat, which also died in Gamera's attack. Irys forms a link with Ayana through an auriculum pendant and becomes the focus of Ayana's quest for revenge, as she is extremely bitter over the loss of her parents and blames Gamera for this, hating him to a core. And she seeks to raise Irys to take vengeance against Gamera. Irys, however, attempts to absorb Ayana in the process of its growth, and the girl's classmate slash boyfriend, kinda, not really, manages to free her from Irys's cocoon. However, it leaves its lair and it kills the village's populace, including her family. I'll touch upon this later. And later grows into its giant adult form. The military then attempts to fight it, however, it miserably fails. Irys flies towards the city of Kyoto, where Ayana has been taken by Asakura and Karata, with Asakura, her being a psychic, deliberately trying to use the girl to summon Irys, which of course does work. And Irys is intercepted mid-flight by Gamera, and the two engage in a pretty poorly edited aerial battle. However, the Japanese army intervenes and knocks Gamera out of the sky with a tactical missile strike. Nagamine and Asagi, of course, her returning from the previous two films, retrieve Ayana and attempt to unsuccessfully get her out of Kyoto. And Karata expresses a belief that Irys has been deliberately created to defeat Gamera so that the Gauss could wipe out humanity, this being part of some kind of prophecy. The two monsters meet and continue their rather lackluster fight. However, Irys easily gains the upper hand, mostly because he has the more articulated and flexible suit than Gamera, and impales Gamera with one of his sword-like arms and leaving him for dead. Irys then makes its way to the Kyoto train station and once again absorbs Ayana, killing Asakura and Karata in the process, thank God. And from within Irys's body, Ayana then experiences the creature's memories and realizes that all of her hatred and bitterness had motivated Irys to go on its mass genocidal killing spree. Good job, dumb bitch. And then, just as she has an epiphany, Gamera plunges his hand into Irys's chest and wrenches the girl free, robbing Irys of its human fusion. Nagamine and Asagi, who are trapped within the train station's wreckage, watch helplessly as Irys impales Gamera's hand and begins to siphon his blood, creating plasma-like fireballs from its tentacles. Gamera then blasts off his injured hand with one of his fireballs and absorbs the fired energy into his arm, forming a fiery plasma fist, and then he executes essentially a Super Falcon Rider punch into Irys's wounded chest, blowing Irys the fuck up and completely destroying the crumbling train station. Yet all three of the main characters are still alive somehow, but whatever. Ayana, still clutched in Gamera's fist, is set down where Nagamine and Asagi are hiding, and the two are unable to revive her. However, Gamera, because he is God, lets out a roar, and Ayana awakens. Gamera leaves the girl wondering why he would save her life after all that she had done, which I kind of can't blame her, because if I was Gamera, I'd have just let her die. And then the movie ends with a giant swarm, a legion, see what I did there, of Gauss. Thousands, if not hundreds of thousands strong, begin to descend upon Japan with the intent of destroying Gamera once and for all. And then Gamera walks into the center of the blazing city and lets out a roar of defiance as the trilogy ends on one of the most infuriating bullshit cliffhanger endings I have ever seen in my entire life. It makes the ending to GMK seem tame. And I think that's a recurring theme with Shizuke Kaneko. So, with that being said, I'm just going to immediately jump into the pros and cons of Gamera 3. Actually, no. So what do I think about this story? Well, it's just okay, I guess. I mean, sure, it's well thought out, and it's well executed, and it's well acted, and it's well written, but coming off of, I mean, this is like the Gamera versus Gauss of the Heisei Gamera trilogy. Coming off of Gamera versus Barugan, I feel Gauss is such a big-ass letdown. Coming off of Gamera 2, Advent of Legion, my favorite Gamera film of the entire franchise, once again, Gamera 3 feels like just a big, massive letdown. And I hate to say that because, technically speaking, this is a very good film. But I just don't like this movie nearly as much as everyone else does. I'm sorry. So that being said, let's get to the pros. I don't think this review will be that long. So pro number one is Gamera himself, thankfully, is very entertaining when he's on screen. I do like his design. This is easily one of my least favorite Gamera designs mainly just because of what it leads to in terms of the problems with the film. But Gamera's design is pretty cool. It's very demonic, and I do like the idea of having a more demonic and badass looking Gamera rather than in a super cutesy but also badass like the Guardian suit. I kind of wish they went more of the Gamera 2 suit design, where you still could have had that similar type of design, but you just want to make it a little sharper and a little meaner, but not quite like this. And the reason this isn't one of my favorite suits, I will explain when I get into the monster battles. But the Gamera himself, also personality-wise, I do like the idea of having a much more aggressive Gamera, rather than, once again, just being a goody-goody two-shoes. Him being a badass, a serious badass, is one thing, and this is one thing I have liked about the previous two films, is that Gamera is still a serious badass, but they dropped the cutesy aspect. Here, he's a much more aggressive monster that seemingly is nearly devoid of any type of human-like emotion. Of course, he's not, as shown by the end of the movie. He's willing to save this piece of shit girl from being killed by this giant monster. So and he clearly does have feelings because he's a living sentient monster. So I do like that about him. And also the lack of the big eyes, I'm not the biggest fan of. Even though it makes sense with this type of Gamera, him being a lot more aggressive. We don't really want to see him have big eyes because the big eyes would kind of clash with this suit design. Still, the thing is, I miss the big eyes, especially from the second Gamera suit. But still, Gamera as a badass, I do like him in this movie. He certainly does have a great sense of threat. And he certainly does look imposing, and he feels like a giant, powerful, badass monster. So I do like that aspect about it. Pro number 2 is the mythology that's established in this movie is very interesting, even though it's kind of complicated, and it also is very reminiscent of something like GMK, which does make sense because both movies are directed by the same guy. The mythology established here, I think, is really interesting, especially with the supposed prophecy that's established, even though, the prophecy cliche is pretty damn overused. You don't really see it well, actually, no, you do see it fairly often in kaiju movies, but I think this is the first time that we saw it in a Gamera movie, so I do like that aspect. I just kind of wish it was used better, because while I do like the idea, when it's established in the third and final installment in a trilogy, it just kind of makes it leaves me feeling like it's too little too late. I wish that this was established either at the end of Guardian or in the second movie, and this movie just expands upon that further. But still, the mythology here is very interesting. It turns out this prophecy is wrong, and Irys is the monster that'll wipe out humanity, and Gamera is the one who will stand up to fight it, of course, because that's actually what happens. But I do like that aspect, but still, I wish that the mythology was brought in a little earlier in the series. And like I said, it just feels like too little too late this late in the franchise. Pro number 3 is the music score, once again, by Kao Otane. It is very similar to Guardian of the Universe. I actually think, no. There's a lot more original stuff here because this movie is a lot darker. Which, speaking of which, I have to update something. Especially the ending theme, I really do like, even though I hate this movie's bullshit cliffhanger ending. The theme that plays at the end is kind of a slowed down remix version of Gamera's theme that is used throughout this series. And it definitely does get your blood pumping, and it makes you just want to see Gamera kick all sorts of ass. And the rest of the movie overall is very good throughout the film. It's mythic, it's dark, it's imposing, it's grandiose, it's orchestral, it's ominous. I think this movie has the best score of the entire Gamera franchise, and just in general of the entire Gamera trilogy. Kawatane, you really outdid yourself with this film. Not gonna lie. And of course, pro number 4 is the special effects for this movie are really fucking good. Except for one aspect, though I will touch upon that later. The suits look very, very, very convincing. They're very well detailed. They're completely seamless. There's no zippers. There's no exposed skin. There's none of that. I really do like the special effects when done with the suits. The beam effects look great. The fire effects look great. The miniature sets are really, 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 really good. They actually look like real buildings, and the way that they're shot actually makes these monsters look like they're giant monsters. There's a lot of low-angled shots of the monsters as they're fighting. Um, the composite shots look a lot better, even better than in the previous film, especially in the first. Overall, the special effects are pretty good for the most part. And they're not my favorite effects done in the entire Gamera trilogy. That's from the second. But I definitely do think that the special effects do reach their peak of the Heisei Gamera trilogy in this film. And that's about it for the pros. So let's move on to the cons. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 cons with Gamera 3. So brace yourself, guys. This is going to be a rough one. Con number 1 is the bad CG. I'm not going to talk about this one for too much, but the CG, once again, does look pretty shitty. The only bit of CGI that I do like is when Irys is in flight, because they use a lot of prismatic, bluish, greenish, glowing colors to showcase Irys flying, and it looks really pretty. It's obvious CG, but still, it looks really cool. But other than that, the CG work just looks pretty fucking terrible, aside from the beam effects and the fire effects. The CG just looks awful. Not quite as bad as it does in the previous 2 movies, but still, it does look pretty shitty. When Gamera's flying, when they use CG, it looks terrible. When Irys is... The entire aerial fight is done with CG, and I think it looks terrible. It's also edited it's edited very poorly, so that certainly doesn't help. But the CG missiles and the CG planes, the CG models of both Gamera and Irys. Well, Irys looks pretty, but it's still obvious CG. A lot of the CG in this movie just looks pretty fucking terrible. So, not much to say there. Japan, in my opinion, aside from beam effects, and maybe some transformation effects from other superheroes that they do, Japan has just never been the greatest at doing CG, at least until they did Shin Gojira. Con number 2 is Irys himself. I really don't like Irys. I think he's one of the, or he, she, it. I'll just go with he, just for the hell of it. I think Irys is a very bland monster. I get no sense of personality from the thing. I just kind of feel like it's the kaiju version of John Carpenter's The Thing. But that's also an insult to John Carpenter's The Thing, because that monster is awesome. Irys, I don't think, is very awesome. I don't like Irys's design. It looks too fucking disproportionately weird. Like, Irys has no arms. All he has is these blade-like appendages. He has no legs. He has, like, these stake-like appendages. He has a shit ton of tendrils that flail and flop around like Shin Gojira's tail. Again, with the Shin Gojira references. I don't like his head. He has no eyes. He has no mouth. He has a really shitty roar. Or not really shitty, but it's a creepy roar. His roars are essentially kind of just like low-pitched down whale songs, which creep the shit out of me. I just don't like Irys's design. And it's also stated in this movie that supposedly Irys is like some kind of distant cousin of the Gauss. I call bullshit. I don't see any aspects of the Gauss in Irys's design whatsoever. I think that is just a complete and utter piece of pull out of your ass bullshit. Nah, Irys and Gauss are not related whatsoever. I'm sorry. And I just don't like Irys. He's one of my least favorite Gamera monsters, and I just don't like him. Con number 3 is I think this movie is too dark. A lot of people are probably saying, "What? You don't like a dark monster movie?" I do. Just only to a certain point. A dark atmosphere is great. A dark story, also great. But dark characters with no redeemable qualities, that's where you lose me. But I'll talk about that when I get to a certain character. But I just think this movie's too dark for my tastes. The monster action, I don't mind being gritty and violent, but it's also everything around the monster action that's gritty and violent. That just, it makes this movie feel very draining for me to sit through. And it's not my cup of tea. Con number 4 is this movie's bullshit cliffhanger ending. I hate this movie's cliffhanger ending. I hate cliffhangers in general. There's a few exceptions, one of which will be about a movie that I'll be discussing very, very, very soon. But unless the cliffhanger ending has a resolution in a future film, I hate. I especially hate when the end of a franchise gets a cliffhanger ending, because I see that as them just being lazy. The filmmakers were too fucking lazy to figure out a way to end this franchise, so they just said, "Let's just leave people hanging, and then we'll elaborate on that further." But this movie never got a fucking sequel. So I hate this movie's ending with a burning passion. It drives me insane every time I see this movie. And it damn near makes me want to just take my disc and toss it out the fucking window. I hate this movie's ending with a burning passion. Con number 5. The cast of this movie is also, once again, very, very bland. I'm not going to talk too much about this. None of the characters are that interesting. They have decent dialogue and they're acted well, except for Maribe. I don't really care for Maribe. I think his acting is a little too goody goody two shoes and a little too over the top goody goody two shoes at times. I don't like Maribe. Asagi feels wasted in this film. Not like she's literally drunk, but I feel like her potential is very wasted. Once again, Nagamine is the only character in this movie that I feel really tries with her performance, and she does. But I don't like her nearly as much as I do in Guardian. Miss Asakura and Kurata, I can't stand these two. I think they're some of the most annoying characters in any monster movie I've ever seen. Kurata is just one ugly son of a bitch. He has this look on his face throughout the movie that's just like this total shit-eating. It's like he's like Japanese Tim Curry. I think he's just an ugly son of a bitch with a massive pedophile face. His dialogue is terrible. It's all egotistical bullshit. Miss Asakura, she's just kind of very one note. Like, I'm right, nobody else is wrong. I will use my gifts to unveil this or fulfill this prophecy. I just don't like these characters. They're just garbage, utter garbage, and they make this. I'm not sure which one's worse. So I probably have to go with Kurata because his dialogue is so. I hate egotistical dialogue unless it's done on purpose, and it's also done for comedic purposes. But here, all his dialogue is extremely egotistical, and I can't stand that kind of dialogue from characters. Not to mention, I just can't stand looking at his face. I can't stand Kurata. Con number 6. This movie is not paced very well. It's very imbalanced. There's parts of it that are paced relatively well, mainly like the first 15 minutes, and also the last 25 or so. Mainly, it's the big final monster battle. That's paced kind of okay, but overall, this movie is a lot slower paced. And I've said before, I don't like movies with a slow pace unless it's done right. And here, I just don't think it's done right. This has to do with one big problem I have with this movie, or two big problems that I have with this movie. But yeah, this movie is not paced very well. It's better paced than the original Gamera, and it's also way better paced than something like Gamera versus Zigra, but could have been done a lot better here, if you ask me. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Con number 7. The lack of Gamera. Yeah, it's another repeat of Gamera versus Barugan. Because I like Gamera's design and I like his personality, it leaves me wanting to see more of Gamera in this movie. But really, Gamera is only 2, sort of 3 scenes. There's his massacre of the Gauss in the beginning, and then there's the aerial dogfight with Irys at the end, and then there's his on the ground fight with Irys at the very end. That's it. and this is a longer Gamera movie. This is the longest of the entire franchise. It's an hour and 55 minutes long, which I don't mind. I don't mind a kaiju movie being that long. But I'd be willing to say Gamera has maybe 12 minutes of screen time in the entire movie. Maybe 15 if you push it. But the lack of Gamera absolutely drives me nuts. And for the finale of a series that has the title monster's name in the title, for him to have so little screen time, and especially in the finale, pisses me the fuck off. I actually think it's worse. The lack of Gamera is worse than it is in Gamera versus Barugan. And that's really saying something. Con number 8. The monster battles in this movie are pretty fucking piss poor. The only one that's kind of acceptable is Gamera's massacre of the 2 Gauss at the beginning. And that's mainly just because it's not really that much of a fight. Gamera shows up, blows up 1 Gauss. It turns out to be turned out to be alive inside of a destroyed building, but it's just really mangled up. So Gamera kills it. Then Gamera flies off after the 2nd Gauss and kills it too. That one's okay, but that's just because it showcases how much of a juggernaut that Gamera has become compared to the Gauss, and just how easily he can just obliterate these little fuckers. But the final monster fight, this is where I coined the phrase Gamera 3 syndrome, because the final monster battle with Gamera versus Irys, it's really, really awkward. It just results in the monster fights leading down to nothing but just awkward, soft, shoving, pushing, and sort of slugging matches. And it's pretty, in my opinion, piss poor. Of course, I coined the phrase Gamera 3 syndrome in my Godzilla vs. Destroyer review. The fights there suffer from that same issue. And that's because I don't think these 2 costumes were really well designed for monster combat in mind. Irys looking the way that he looks, there's no way that thing can fight other than as a beam spammer. And with Gamera's design, the big reason why I don't like it is because I feel like Shizuke Kaneko and Shinji Higuchi had looks in mind over practicality. This is why Godzilla Final Wars design is my all-time favorite Godzilla suit, because that suit looks badass, but it's also very practical, and it has kaiju combat in mind. It's very slim, it's very muscular, it's very maneuverable, it's very flexible. This suit for Gamera is very stiff, or it's not like very stiff, but it looks stiff. It's too back heavy and it's too bottom heavy. Gamera's arms aren't as long as they should be for this design. I just don't really. This is really the biggest reason why I don't like Gamera's design in this movie, is because it doesn't have kaiju combat practicality in mind, and that's what leads to these monster fights being kind of piss poor in my eyes. So yeah, I don't like the monster fights. There's also not that many. There's not much monster action in this movie. And again, this movie being almost 2 hours long, and I'd be willing to bet there's maybe about a half hour's worth of monster action, if that, in this film. Everything else has to do with the human characters. And with all that said, we finally get to my biggest problem with this movie. Con number 9. And that is Ayana. I cannot stand Ayana for the fucking life of me. I am not saying that. For anybody out there who's just going to say you don't like Ayana because you're a sexist asshole, no, that is not why I don't like Ayana. I don't like Ayana because she's made to be a sympathetic character, yet she's also one of the most unsympathetic characters I have ever seen in my entire life, and I will explain here. I will explain why right now. Now, at first, you do sympathize with Ayana in the beginning because this movie showcases a character who is a victim of losing her parents in a monster fight. Godzilla 1984 does this too with the scientist character. Can't remember his name off the top of my head, but that character is done very well because he's one of those characters who grew up with the fact that he lost his parents to a monster attack. And I thought they'd do the same with Ayana when I first saw this movie. So at first, I did grow to like her. And I continued liking her throughout the movie, even when she awakened Irys. Now, at first, I thought that they would do something different with Irys awakening, that Irys would start feeding on people behind her back, and then halfway through the movie, she grew to realize Irys is a fucking monster, and Irys still wants to chase after her and kills everything in its way to get to her. But then I realized she's the one who is coddling Irys along and feeding Irys with both actual food and also its thirst for vengeance. And she is also the one who kickstarts Irys in going on a mass murder killing spree. Irys kills half the village, including her family, the family that she was staying with, one of which being even her little cousin, who she was calling her little brother, who she was looking after at the beginning of this movie. Irys kills that family, and Irys kills thousands and thousands of people when he lands in Kyoto. I'm sorry. At this point, I cannot sympathize with Ayana. I will not sympathize with Ayana when she is literally an accessory to mass genocide. At that point, I grew to hate this chick. I do still to this day hate this chick. She is the number one reason why I cannot stand watching this movie. Not to mention, I don't think her acting is all that good. She has this deadpan expression on her face throughout 95% of the film. She doesn't have much dialogue, and when she does speak, she's kind of like Japanese Raven from Teen Titans, just not in a good way. She's very monotone. She has no expression on her face whatsoever. I just think she's like a modern day Emiko. Her acting is very lackluster in my eyes. And that is why I cannot stand Ayana. I can't sympathize with this chick. I can't support this chick. And at the very end, when she is crying, saying, "I'm sorry for what I did," I scream at the TV, "You should be sorry, bitch, and you should be thrown in juvie for the rest of your life." Had this movie had gotten a sequel, I would have demanded that there would be a scene where Ayana was punished for all the crimes that she committed. Because, like I said, in my eyes, she's an accessory to mass murder. I can't sympathize with a character who's an accessory to mass murder. Same reason I can't sympathize with the asshole rapist from the anime Dune Megalopolis. He rapes his own sister, and yet the anime is supposed to just say, well, he's the main character. You have to sympathize with this guy. Fuck you. I cannot and will not sympathize with a character who is so horrible. Same reason I can't sympathize with all the characters from The Gallows or Unfriended, because they're all horrible, sociopathic dickheads. I don't like Ayana. I think she's one of the worst characters of the entire Gamera franchise. I think she's one of the worst characters of all kaiju movies in general. Can't stand her. I'm sorry. So with all that said, I don't like this movie, guys. It's a lot more frustrating than I initially thought it was. It's one of my least favorite Gamera movies of the entire series. It's easily one of my least favorite kaiju films. I would rather watch King Kong vs. Godzilla than this movie. And boy, is that saying something. even though I'm giving this movie a much higher rating than King Kong vs. Godzilla. At least King Kong vs. Godzilla has more screen time for each monster. So with that being said, I will be giving Gamera 3 Revenge of Irys a 4.5 out of 10. Don't like this movie at all. It's one of my least favorite monster movies of all time. I'm sorry, but I'm also not sorry. So post your comments down below and let me know what you think. Hit the like button and hit the subscribe button. Share this video with your friends. And look forward to a few hours later today where I review the finale of the entire Gamera franchise. When I talk about a far superior film. With 2006's Soul Millennium Gamera movie, Gamera the Brave. And as always, go out and stop a dumb chick from resurrecting a giant monster so she can be an accessory to its mass genocidal murdering spree. And I will see you guys in the next one. And thank you, Nintendo Zilla 98, for stopping by.